The Industrial Revolution in the modern history, the process of change from an agrarian and handcraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacturing. This process began in Britain in the 18th century and from there spread to other parts of the world. Although used earlier by French writers, the term Industrial Revolution was first popularized by the English economic historian Arnold Toynbee to describe Britain's economic development from 1760s to 1840s. Since Toynbee's times, the term has been more broadly applied. The Industrial Revolution was the transition to a new manufacturing process in Europe and the United States. In the period from about 1760 to sometime between 1820 and 1840. This transition included going from hand production methods to machines, new chemical manufacturing, iron production process, the increased use of steam power and water power, the development of machine tools, and the rise of the mechanized factory systems. The Industrial Revolution also led to an unprecedented rise in the rate of population growth. Textiles were the dominant industry in the Industrial Revolution in terms of employment, value of output, and capital invested. The textile industry was also the first to use modern production methods. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain, and many of the technological innovations were of British origin. By the mid-18th century, Britain was the world's leading commercial nation, controlling a global trading empire with colonies in North America and the Caribbean, and with major military and political hegemony on the Indian subcontinent, particularly with the proto-industrialized Mughal Bengal, through the activities of the East India Companies. The development of trade and the rise of business were among the major causes of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution marks a major turning point in the history. Almost every aspect of the daily life was influenced in some way. Average income and population began to exhibit unprecedented sustained growth. Some economists have said the most important effect of the Industrial Revolution was the standard of living for the general population in the Western world began to increase consistently for the first time in history. Although others have said that it did not begin to meaningfully improve until the late 19th and 20th centuries. The gross domestic product per capita was broadly stable before the Industrial Revolution and the emergence of the modern capitalist economy, while the Industrial Revolution began an era of per capita economic growth in capitalist economies. Economic historians are in the agreement that the onset of the Industrial Revolution is the most important event in the history of humanity since the domestication of animals and plants. The precise start of the end of the Industrial Revolution is still debated among historians as the place of economic and social change. Eric Hobsbawm held that the Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the 1780s and was not fully felt until the 1830s or 1840s, while D. S. Ashton held that it occurred roughly between 1760 and 1830. Rapid industrialization first began in Britain starting with mechanized spinning in the 1780s, with high rates of growth in steam power and iron products occurring after 1800. Mechanized textile products spread from Great Britain to continental Europe and the United States in the early 19th century, with important centers of textiles, iron, and coal emerging in Belgium and the United States, later textiles in France. An economic recession occurred from the late of 1830 to the early 1840s, when the adoption of the Industrial Revolution's early innovations, such as mechanized spinning and weaving, flowed and their markets matured. Innovation developments late in the period, such as the increasing adoption of locomotives, steamboats, and steamships, hot blast iron smelting, and new technologies such as the electric telegraph, widely introduced in the 1840s and the 1850s, were not powerful enough to drive high rates of growth. The rapid economic growth began to occur after 1870s, springing from a new group of innovation in what has been called the Second Industrial Revolution. This innovation includes new steel-making process, mass production, assembly lines, electrical grid systems, and the large-scale manufacture of mechanic tools and the use of increasingly advanced mechanical and steam power factories.
The day the world stopped was the day we found where to go. Lost together, we discovered ourselves again. And we realized that the things that matter deserve time.
That looks good. A comer.
For two.
From now on, we're not gonna leave anything on our plates. Because we've learned to savor the moments that were always there. And they never tasted this good.
Canelo. Be bold.
Be bolder.
Whoa. Come on, Canelo. Be bold.
Be bolder as light.
You got it. Let me get in there. Tecate Light. Born bold.
Good afternoon. My name is Fernando López, and I will give the topic of causes of the Industrial Revolution. Talking about the main causes that have in the Industrial Revolution, were complicated. It's a complicated thing because it's a remaining topic which is in debate. More cases are of geographic factors, including Britain's vast mineral resources. In addition to the metal ores, Britain had the highest quality coal reserves known as the time, as well as abundant power, highly productive agriculture, and numerous seaports and navigable waterways. Some historians believe that the Industrial Revolution was an outgrowth of social and institutional change brought by the feudalism in Britain after the English Civil War in the 17th century. Although feudalism began to break down after the Black Death of the mid in the 14th century, followed by other epidemics until the population reached a low in the 14th centuries. This created labor shortage and led to the falling of the prices and a peak in real wage around the 1500s, after which population growth began reducing wages. Inflation causes the coinage debasement after 1540, followed by precious metals supplies increasing from the Americas caused land rentals, often long-term leases that transferred to their own debts, to fall in the real terms. Talking about the enclosure movements and the British agricultural revolution made food production more efficient and less labor intensive, forcing that the farmers who could no longer be self-sufficient in agriculture into cottage industry, for example weaving, and in the longer terms into the cities and the newly developed factories. The colonial expansion in the 17th century, which is the company's development of international trade creation in the financial markets and accumulation of the capital, are also cited as a factor. As the scientific revolution on the century, a change in the marriage patterns to the getting married later made people able to accumulate more human capital during their youth, thereby encouraging economic development. Until the 1980s, it was universally believed that the academic historians that technological innovation was the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and the enabling technology was the invention and improvement to the steam engine. However, recent research into the marketing era has challenged the traditional supply-oriented interpretation of the Industry Revolution. Lewis Mumford has proposed the Industrial Revolution had its origins in the early Middle Ages, much earlier than most estimated. He explained that the model was standardized mass production was the printing press, and the architectural model for the industrial era was the clock. He also cites that the monastic emphasis on order and timekeeping, as well as the fact that medieval cities had at their center a church with bell ringing at regular intervals, as being necessary precursors to a greater synchronization necessary for later more physically and manifestations such as the steam engine. The presence of a large domestic market should also be considered as an important driver of the Industrial Revolution, particularly explaining why it occurs in the British. In other nations such as France, markets were split by the local regions, which often imposed tolls and tariffs on goods traded among them. Internal tariffs were abolished by Henry VIII in England. They survived in Russia in 1953 to 1789, and in France from 1839 in Spain. Governments granted limited monopolies to inventors under a development patent system. That the status of the monopolies in 1623 is considered as an influential factor to the effect of patents, both good and ill, and the development of the industrialization are clearly illustrated in the history and the steam engine, the key enabling technology in a return for publicity, revealing the working of an invention that pattern system rewards inventory such as James Watt, by allowing them and monopolize the production of the first steam engines, thereby rewarding inventors and increasing the pace of the technology development. However, monopolies bring them their own inefficiencies, which may counterbalance or even overbalance the beneficial effects of publishing ingenuity and rewarding inventors. Watt's monopoly prevented other inventors such as Richard Triptych, William Murdoch, or Jonathan Hornblower, whom Bolton and Watt sued, from introducing improved steam engines, thereby restarting the spread of the steam power. Okay, the main causes in Europe, talking about the the causes of the Industrial Revolution, occurred in Europe and not in the other parts of the world in the 18th centuries, particularly China, India, and the Middle East, which pioneers in shipbuildings, textile productions, water mills, and much on the period between the 70s, 50s, and the 1100s, or are the other terms like a classical antiquity or the Middle Age. A recent account argued that the Europeans have been characterized for thousands of years by a freedom-loving culture originating from the aristocrats' societies of early Indo-European invaders. Many historians, however, have challenged the explanation as being not only Eurocentric but also ignoring historical context. In fact, of the Industrial Revolution, there existed something of a global economic disparity between the most advanced regions in the world economy. These historians have suggested a number of the factors, including education technology change, see the scientific revolution in Europe, modern governments, and work attitudes, ecology, and culture. China was the world's most technologically advanced country for many centuries. However, China stagnated economically and technologically and was surpassed by Western Europe between the age of the discovery, by which time China banned imports and denied entry of foreigners. China was also a totalitarian society. China also heavily taxed and transported goods. Modern estimates of per capita income in the Western Europe in the late 18th centuries are regardless of the $105,000 purchasing power parity, and Britain had a per capita income of nearly $2,000, whereas in China, by comparison, has only $450. India was essentially feudal, politically fragmented, and not as an economic advance as the Western Europe. Okay, now talking about the Britain, the main causes the Great Britain provide the legal and cultural foundations that enable entrepreneurs to pioneer an industrial revolution. Key factors fostering the environment were the period of peace and stability which followed by the unification of England and Scotland. There were no internal trade barriers, including between England and Scotland, or federal tolls and tariffs, making Britain the largest coherent market in Europe. The rule of the law, which is the enforcing property rights and respecting the sanctity of contracts. Also, we have the straightforward legal system that allows the formation of joint stock companies for corporations. Free market, talking about capitalism, and geographical and natural resource advantages of the Great Britain were the fact that it has extensive coastlines and many navigable rivers in the age that where water was the easiest means of transportation, and Britain has the highest quality coal in Europe. Okay, there were too many values that really dropped in the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Their values were self-interest and an entrepreneurial spirit. Because of their interest, many industrial advantages were made that resulted in a huge increase in a personal wealth and customer revolutions. These advancements also greatly benefited in the British society as a whole. The countries around the world started to recognize that the changing advantages in the Britain and use them as an example to begin their own industrial revolution.
Bullying.
The Me Too movement against sexual harassment.
Masculinity.
Is this the best a man can get? Is it? We can't hide from it.
Sexual harassment is taking over.
It's been going on far too long. We can't laugh it off.
Who's the daddy?
What I actually think she's trying to say.
Making the same old excuses.
Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
But something finally changed.
Allegations regarding sexual assault and sexual harassment.
But she says
And there will be no going back. Because we believe in the best in men.
Men need to hold other men accountable.
Smile, sweetie.
Come on.
To say the right thing. To act the right way.
Bro, not cool, not cool.
Some already are. In ways big
Yo, men, we're acting like we
and small.
I am strong.
But some is not enough.
It's not how we treat each other, okay?
Because the boys watching today will be the men of tomorrow.
Hi, my name is Sonia. The theme is technological development. England began to undergo a series of transformations that forever changed the source of humanity, transforming traditional production, the technicals, and laying the foundation of today's capitals. Many history distinguishing between the French Industrial Revolution 1760 to 1850 and the Second Industrial Revolution 1850 to 1840. The first stage is characterized by the progress, mechanical traditional of production in factories, while the second involved the creation of new ways of organizing production and work. The most direct antecedent to the Industrial Revolution in England that was found in the Agricultural Revolution. In the 18th century, England was a predominant agricultural society. There was insignificant increasing population especially. Therefore, the demands for food increased, which might process and the emergence of the agricultural revolution. Numerous technical improvements are the introduction in agriculture is notably increasing productive tanks and mechanic process and means that fear pits are needed to cultivate on the land. Therefore, spurs labor in general to work in the industry at the same time an increase in the demand for metal for the agricultural instruments and machinery that became manufactured forward the development of the metallurgy and steel industry. The streaming. The Scandinavian James Watt he introduced a series of improvements to the existing on the hardware the development of the industry. The development of the steam engine during in the Industrial Revolution in England playing a very important role in generating the movement of machines and the base and the diverse pumps, locomotives, marine engines, etc. that were used during in the Industrial Revolution to manufacture and transport goods trade. The spinning machine. Jenny multi-pole spinner inversion and the 1764 by James in Lancashire. In the role in the Industrial Revolution in English was extremely important as the greatly introduced to the work required to produce chair. And thanks worker cloth and the aiding of the more callings at the same time leaving labor costs and increasing productivity. The Westfleet Railway line opened in England on April 50, 1830, in linking on the city of Liverpool and Manchester to industrial northern capitals. These facts has weakened how, during the Industrial Revolution in England, demand for the mining industries together with the invasion of the Spain, England led to the emergence of railing on lines for the first time in the history on the impossibility to transport quantities of heavy metals had Spain never imagined to the shorting table times. Invention of the steel machine. The Friendly Steel patented of John Cade with a number of later improvements double wearing out worsen in the invasive vapor spinning and the heaven. Iron industry. The United Kingdom generated an important and large amount of tons of metal for more than the large-scale production of chemicals was a major advance during in the Industrial Revolution. That first was the production of sulfuric acid using the lead chamber process invented by the Englishman John Revolutión, James Watt Freeze Associates. The mines tunnel, it was used cement in the world's first underwater tunnel. Joseph Absinthe, a bridge-breaking tunnel builder, patented a chemical process for making Portland cement, with a major advance in the construction trades. There were several technology advances, but a final the hard reduced to the tools already mentioned.
Have you noticed how everything seems a little impersonal nowadays? We've all become usernames, reference numbers and IP addresses. That's why at Starbucks we've decided to do things differently. From now on, we won't refer to you as a latte or a mocha, but instead as your folks intended, by your name. Okay, we know it's only a little thing. But hey, why don't we buy you a coffee on the morning of the 14th of March and you can introduce yourself? We're Starbucks. Nice to meet you.
The day the world stopped was the day we found where to go.
Le echan mucho, les vas a ver el feo, así que... Yeah, medium to high.
Lost together, we discovered ourselves again. And we realized that the things that matter deserve time.
That looks good. A comer.
For two.
From now on, we're not going to leave anything on our plates. Because we've learned to savor the moments that were always there. And they never tasted this good.
Greatness, it's just something we made up. Somehow we've come to believe that greatness is a gift reserved for a chosen few. For prodigies, for superstars, and the rest of us can only stand by watching. You can forget that. Greatness is not some rare DNA strand. It's not some precious thing. Greatness is no more unique to us than breathing. We're all capable of it. All of us.
My name is Ronaldo Mauricio Martínez Ríos. I'm going to tell to you about the social effects in the Industrial Revolution. Factory system. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, most of the workforce work employed in agriculture, either as self-employed farmers, as landowners, or tenants, or as landless agricultural laborers. It was common for families in various parts of the world to spin yarn, weave cloth, and make their own clothing. Households had spun and woven for market production. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, India, China, and regions of Iraq and elsewhere in Asia and the Middle East produced most of the world's cotton cloth, while Europeans produced wool and linen cloth. We can see a 14 athlete Jenny for about 6 pounds in 1792. Standards of living. Some economists, such as Robert L. Lucas Jr., cite that the real effect of the Industrial Revolution was that for the first time in history, the living standards of the masses of ordinary people have begun to undergo sustained growth. Nothing remotely like these economic behaviors is maintained by the classical economists having as a theoretical possibility. Food and nutrition. Chronic hunger and malnutrition were the norm for the majority of the population of the world, including Britain and France, until the late 19th century, until about 1750, in large part due to malnutrition. Life expectancy in France was about 35 years and about 14 years in Britain. The United States population of the time was athletically fit, much higher on average, and had life expectancy of 45 and 50 years as those. UAC life expectancy declined by a few years by mid 19th century. Housing. The rapid population growth in the 19th century included the new industrial and manufacturing cities, as well as service centers Kush and Edinburgh and London. The critical factor was financing, which was handled by building societies that dealt directly with large contracting firms. Private renting from housing landlords was the dominant tenure. Campsites this was usual of advent to tenants. Clothing and consumer goods. Customers benefited from falling price for clothing and household articles such as cast iron cooking utensils, and in the following decades stoves for cooking and space heating. Coffee, tea, sugar, tobacco, and chocolate became affordable to many in Europe. Watches and household clocks became popular consumer items, meeting the demands of the consumer revolution and growth in wealth of the middle class in Britain. Potter and entrepreneur Joshua Wedgwood, founder of Wedgwood Fine China and Porcelain, created goods such as tableware, which was starting to become a common feature on dining tables. Urbanization. The growth of modern industry since the late 18th century led to massive urbanization and the rise of new great cities, first in Europe and in other regions, as new opportunities brought huge numbers of migrants from rural communities into urban areas. In 1800, only 3 of the world's populations live in cities, compared to nearly 50 today. The beginning of the 21st century, Manchester had population of 10,000 in 1717, would be 1,911 in that version to 2.3 million.